It is the final episode of the year, kids. The problem with doing the intro after having recorded the episode is that my voice is freaking ravaged. But I can't usually do the intro until I know what I'm actually going to say. So what I can tell you, as we embark on the final episode of 2023, is that I got some fun questions to answer about Christmas music and about podcasting. And we're doing the top 10 countdown, kids. We're doing the song of the year as we close 2023. I want to thank you for being here this many episodes throughout the course of the year. We're going to have a little fun to see it out. I am glad you're with me. And hey, we'll get to it on the other side. Duh. Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay. I was going to kick this off with a whole comedy bit about goofy stuff in Christmas music, but the truth is, gentle listener, not really feeling it. Not really feeling it. And the last thing I would want to be on this program is in any way disingenuous. You know, there are people in the world whose job it is to entertain the masses, and we call those people entertainers. So what I think I'll do is I'll leave the entertaining to the entertainers. And the truth is, I don't want to be negative on this podcast anyways. The whole thing is positive talk, man. And the other truth is, I like Christmas music. Up to a point, okay? Christmas music invokes a place and a time and a spirit and a vibe. Warms your cockles, kids, all right? And what I'm learning is that what I enjoy about the Christmas season, and I really do like the Christmas season, okay? What I like about it, it's that withdrawal from the normal routine where you step away from the world into this kind of quiet, cozy feeling, the separation from normal life. I like this pulling away from normal life. Now, the hustle and bustle can be fun. I get that. Back in my office days, I used to really like Christmas around the office. You know, there was a different energy in the place. There was a different vibe. There was a different atmosphere. You would have your team Christmas party or your department Christmas party. That was always a fun thing. And there was always just a sense of warmth around the place, you know, and novelty. And that was really, really fun. And so I enjoyed the hustle and bustle. I enjoyed that part of it. But ultimately, it is the withdrawal from normal life. It is this kind of pulling back. It is this reflective period of time. One of my favorite Christmas memories ever came in, I think it was 2020, when lockdowns were still on and you could not gather in the traditional way. And I wasn't working in an office at the time. But even if I was, people were working from home, and so that sort of collegial feeling, that didn't exist in 2020 anyways, even if I was an office jockey. But we couldn't gather in groups, at least not indoors, so your traditional Christmas cocktail parties, your come-and-go teas, all that stuff couldn't happen. What wound up happening is that on Christmas Eve, and I'm pretty sure it was 2020, in the midst of that nightmare of a year, when everything went upside down, and yeah, there was my anxiety, but there was the general uneasiness, this sense of everything going off the rails in 2020. And what wound up happening was that amongst my friend group, on Christmas Eve, we wound up gathering around a bonfire in somebody's backyard. And it was just quiet, and there was the fire, and there were some drinks, and there was a snow lightly falling. And it was in the midst of what was the most chaotic and turbulent year that a lot of us had experienced. This moment of tranquility. And it was beautiful. And it's a really, really fond Christmas memory of mine. And that's the thing. What I like about Christmas is this pulling away, this quiet. And it's what I love about New Year's Day. As I've said repeatedly, New Year's Day is my favorite day of the year. And part of that is this just silence. We live in so much noise. We live in so much activity. And now since social media over the past 10 years, it's like the withdrawal never happens. Even if you're sitting at home quietly, there's your phone. And it's all happening. And a lot of us who are addicted to the dang phone, one of my New Year's resolutions, if you like, keep working on getting away from that phone. It's like you don't have this withdrawal from the world anymore. And I like this about the Christmas season, and I like this about New Year's Day because in so many cases, it's just quiet. Go for a walk through your neighborhood on New Year's Day and just feel viscerally this sense of peace that can descend in the quiet of New Year's Day. And the whole period of Christmas, between Christmas Day and New Year's Day, can kind of be that. If you're one of the people who's lucky enough to be off from work during that time, really indulge that period of quiet, that withdrawal from the world. There is something so soothing and edifying and uplifting about that. And that is what I like about the Christmas season. And the Christmas music invokes that, okay? The Christmas music ties to that. And one of the reasons I get annoyed by Christmas music, as I talked about recently, is that it's just crammed into your ear holes from early freaking November, and it is done so for cynical reasons by department stores, right? Don't need to go into that again, but I actually like the Christmas music, and I like, generally speaking, the traditional, what we consider the traditional Christmas music of the 40s, 50s, 60s, right? Give me Bing. I like Frank, give me Andy, give me the Ronettes. I like a lot of that stuff. Aesthetically, I like a lot of that stuff musically. I would far rather listen to the Christmas station than to your typical pop station. And absolutely, I would prefer it to your bro country station, okay? There's a lot worse music than the Christmas music, okay? As bad, particularly modern stuff, as bad as some of that music can be, I like the older stuff, okay? And so when I put out a call for questions for this week's episode, the final episode of the year, and I get a response from our old friends Josh and Katie of Fresh Breath, and they say, "What Christmas song do you despise?" I can't really give a solid answer to that question. It's more conceptually, the way Christmas music is just sort of, you're beaten over the head with it for such a long period of time. And it's so gratuitous and unnecessary. But I don't like to get into stuff that I despise. There's Christmas music that I actually really, really like. Every year at this time, I think of I'll Be Home for Christmas. A lot of Christmas music is so trite and so empty and so kind of head-scratching. Santa Baby. This woman who is celebrating all the dudes that she didn't make out with that year. So Santa, can you reward me with a yacht and real estate? There's that Charlie Brown Christmas spirit in action. There's a lot of Christmas music that is really kind of trite and empty. But then you get a song like I'll Be Home for Christmas. That's Bing Crosby, and that was released in 1943. And what's poignant about that song is that really it's written from the perspective of a soldier who is off at war. And in 1943, World War II is a hoppin', kids. Now, that war started in 1939 with the Nazi invasion of Poland. The Americans kept themselves out of it until 1941. They got a good habit of keeping themselves out of it till a couple years in. 1941, December, Pearl Harbor is sneak attacked by the Japanese, and all of a sudden, the States is in World War II against their will, all right, and the war machine starts up. And so you fast forward, by the end of 1943, there's a lot of U.S. sailors, soldiers stationed around the world, and they've had a taste of it, all right? They've had Pearl Harbor, they've had the Battle of Midway, they've had Guadalcanal, they've had Tarawa, they have had soldiers beginning to fight in North Africa. The war is coming home by the end of 1943, okay? And people are dying, and it's really set in. Now, for a lot of the world, they've been 4 years at it by then. The Americans, a couple years at it, and it's really poignant, this feeling. Again, if you can picture that peaceful, quiet sense of Christmas Eve, and then you've got this song, I'll Be Home for Christmas, If Only in My Dreams, and you are the family of a service person, a Marine, somebody on a ship in the Pacific that might be bombed at any moment, and you're like, my family, the people I love, they're not here. And they're off out there in the most dangerous circumstances you can imagine. And it was going to get worse, by the way. It was poignant enough in 1943. This sense of you're a soldier, you're a sailor, you're not at home for Christmas, and you're in just about the last place you would like to be. And your family is at home hearing this song. You're not there, and they're worried about you, and you're frightened. And it's going to get worse, all right? 1944, 1945 is going to come along. Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. There's going to be the D-Day invasion. There's going to be that liberation of Europe. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people are going to die. So 1943, 1944, 1945 even, you hear this song and it invokes these really poignant and profound memories about the people and the things that ultimately should matter most. And so I really like I'll Be Home for Christmas as a really genuinely heartfelt song produced in the midst of really, really dangerous and difficult times. And I like a lot of this Christmas music, okay? But I cannot answer the question, what Christmas song do you despise? Because I don't think I despise any of them. I turn off Mariah. I don't need to hear the Wham song again, There's a lot of modern Christmas music that I just can't dig on, man. But then the reason for this question from Fresh Breath is that I played a Christmas show last weekend, okay? The Julianne Hobby Country Christmas Classic, all right? And that's what inspired this question from Fresh Breath, but it also inspired another easier to answer question, which is, what song do you really love to perform? All right, what Christmas song was in that show that you really love to perform? And that's much, much easier to answer. And this was a really ambitious production by Julianne. All right, now she is a country artist local to L-Town. I did not know her before this, okay? I got recruited into the band for this show. And she's released an album, and she's a really terrific singer, professional dancer, professionally trained singer. And she's like, I'm just going to put on a big Christmas show, and I'm going to rent like a theater, not a club gig. I'm going to rent a theater. I'm going to sell tickets, and we are going to put on a Christmas show with dancers, with the whole dang thing. And I need a band for that. And so she recruited Heartbreaker Wilson on bass. Heartbreaker Wilson recruited me on drums because we played together in the Lindsay band. And that's how it works, by the way, kids. So much of music comes from networking. It is so much a who you know business. And that's not people scratching each other backs. It's like, we need somebody who can we rely on. I've played with that person. Let's get them in. It's so much about that. I know auditions happen and all that stuff, but fundamentally, so much of it is about making those connections, all right? So if you're not getting a lot of gigs, if you're not getting the sorts of gigs you want, make an effort in 24 to get out into your scene and start meeting people, man, and start playing with people. And that is where the connections come from. And then at the end of the year, a really promising, ambitious, aspiring country artist decides to put on a big theater show, and you wind up on that show because of the people you know who are also connected to it, right? That's the way this game works. And it was intimidating, okay? Because for me, it was learning like 20 songs. And even though some of them were abbreviated versions of Christmas classics, a lot of them were only, a minute and a half or 2 minutes long. It's still learning 20 songs. It's still adding some backups to those songs. It's still understanding the working order of the show. It's not just song, 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 song. There are moments of speaking. There are moments of dancing. There were, I think, 4 wardrobe changes for Julianne herself. I mean, there was a lot. This was a production, right? This was not a gig. This was a production. And I had about 5 weeks to get it together. The way my year has gone, I've not played a lot of gigs, but there have been gigs where I've had to learn a lot of music. And so it started like in June, really, right, to get ready to play whatever. And then in August, there was a Collective Evolution gig, had to learn that set. And then immediately getting ready for a big Fresh Breath show in September. And then immediately getting ready for the CD release show in November. And then immediately getting ready for the Country Christmas Classic. It's been this string of gigs that I've had to do a lot of prep for. And one of the things I miss about being in a dedicated band is that I know the songs. It's like, hey, we booked a gig. Great. I know the songs. Let's do a rehearsal. Let's get it together. Bang. I wrote the drum parts. I think I'll remember what they are. You know what I mean? Whereas this sideman thing requires you to really, in a lot of cases, put a ton of legwork into what usually winds up being a one-off show, right? That's demanding. And so Julianne, super pro, she's like, here's the running order. Here's tracks that you can learn to. And so I charted them all out. I don't normally chart music. Normally I've got enough time. I prefer to learn songs by osmosis. So just play them 100 times and then they get into your system and then you're good to go. In this case, it's like too much. And not a huge long time frame to get this together to the level that I like to be prepared, especially for a show like this, which is no joke, man. This is a ticketed theater production. So you've got to have your stuff together. And so I charted each of the songs in the way that I chart songs and then set myself to just playing this set every freaking day for about 5 weeks to get it ready. And then there were rehearsals and get to the gig. And like there was a lot of work that went into doing this show. And I took it on very deliberately because I haven't been challenged on that level for a while. Like I was going in and playing with a bunch of new people who I didn't know in a different sort of format, this production sort of format that I haven't done a lot of, particularly recently. And it was learning a lot of music, and it was owning my position in the band as the drummer. There was a lot that went into this show, okay? And I'm glad I took it on. It was a lot, but I'm glad I took it on. And the show went great. I think the band did really well. I think Julianne was really happy. And I think the audience we had was really happy. And it was ultimately a great success, you know? And so it's much easier for me to answer the question from Fresh Breath, what was your favorite song to perform on that show? And the first thing I'm going to point to is an original song that Julianne recorded and released this year. It's called Snowfall, and it's a modern pop Christmas song, but it's way more genuine and a lot less tacky than a lot of your modern pop Christmas songs, okay? And I really like this tune, and it's got some interesting drums to play with, and it's wonderfully recorded, I think by a cat in Nashville who put this together for her. And you can find it out there, all right? The Snowfall song by Julianne Hobby is out there in the world, and you can listen to it. I really, really like it, and it was fun to play that. And I think one of the things that was fun about it is I'm pretty sure it was the first time that that song's ever been performed, right? Julianne has the song, she wrote the song, but she's never performed the song with the band. And so it was the first time that she got to hear her song and perform her song with a full band. And it's always fun to be part of that as a musician. You always want your artist to be happy, and then sensing her delight at being able to perform the song that she wrote live. And we did it fairly well, I think. And so there was like a novelty in that. Felt really good. It's a fun song. It's a good song. It's a fun song. And that was a fun one to play. The other one that we really liked was this version of White Christmas that was recorded by Gwen Stefani. And it's just, it's White Christmas, but it's done pop style. And it's done the way I described it on my charts as really swampy. It's got this super deep groove pocket. It's very simple, but the pocket is deep and the pocket is really swampy. And you musicians out there will know what I'm talking about. Just this like jangly groove that you just sit in it. Important to get the tempo right on that when you play it live. Because if you play it too fast, it will lose that swampiness. It will lose that really deep groove. And then it becomes a little bit stiff, maybe a little bit too fast, a little mechanical. So it's like really important to lay back on that and just be swampy about it. And it's a really fun arrangement. And we played it well. So I would say the two songs that I really enjoyed performing, Snowfall by Julianne Hobby and this version of White Christmas by Gwen Stefani, which we all really loved because you just sit in that groove and you sing your little backups and it's just fun. And it's White Christmas, everybody loves White Christmas. And I want to thank Fresh Breath, Josh and Katie for so many freaking things. For having me play on their record that was released this year that I'm really proud of. For having me play in their live band when they have the full band. It's been a pleasure to do that. It's been a pleasure to get to know those people and to work with them. And they've been huge supporters of the podcast. Always submitting questions, always reacting to the episodes I put out, always listening. And I so appreciate that, Josh and Katie. I appreciate all of that so much. Now, for the rest of you, now's the time to plug Josh and Katie's brand new, I guess we'll call it a video podcast, called Band in the Van. Now, they are on the road right now. They spend much of their year on the road together, living out of the Fresh Breath van. And at this moment, they are down in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, where I have had the pleasure of playing in the past. And they're down there right now. They'll be spending a lot of the winter down there, playing shows in the Rio Grande. And that's a great place to be during the Canadian winter, by the way. And so what they're doing this year is they've launched this video podcast called Band in the Van. And you can find it on YouTube. Go to the Fresh Breath page. Go to their channel, I guess, on YouTube. And you'll see these episodes. And they are 15-minute slice of life on the road videos. They've launched 2 of them now, 2 episodes. And if you were a fan of the road-episodes that I did back in the day when I was touring, it's kind of like that. It's here's the band, here's where we are today, and just talking about whatever comes up. And it's fun. If you are interested in slice of life stuff, if you are interested in the realities of being an independent band on the road, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like, go and check out the Band in the Van podcast with Josh and Katie of Fresh Breath, okay? Because it's really entertaining. It's going to be a lot of fun. And it's very, very interesting to watch people who are living the dream, man. You need, as I've said before, you need the proof. You need the evidence that it's possible to do these things if you are an indie artist. And you think, what I would really like is to be playing music full time. Josh and Katie are doing that. Go watch their video podcast, Band in the Van, and figure out just a little bit how they're doing that. And if you have questions, submit them because I'm sure they would love to have those kind of content leads to come up with new episodes. So go check that out. thank you as ever, Josh and Katie of Fresh Breath. One of the things I'm going to do, interspersed with this holiday hodgepodge, is the song of the year. All right. I know I haven't reviewed a whole lot of new music lately, but I like doing the song of the year because we've talked about a ton of freaking music this year, man. We have talked about a ton of music this year, and I've listened to a ton of music that did not make it onto the podcast. But what I've done is I have narrowed down the songs we've talked about this year into a top 10 list, which was incredibly difficult for me to curate. But we do have a song of the year, kids, which it might change by the time I get to it in the next 20 minutes or so. We do have a song of the year, but I'm going to give you the top 10 countdown really quick. My favorite 10 songs that we've talked about on the show this year. Starting at number 10, it's going to be a combo. I know that's cheating and I know that's hedging, but I had a lot of songs and I'm just going to give 10th place a tie, and that is Hate Yourself by Lost Hearts. Remember we talked about Lost Hearts? That is a young, swaggery American rock and roll band. These guys are really doing it, man. They got the look, they got the vibe. This is guitar rock and roll, just like the old days, man. This band Lost Hearts, and they released a song called Hate Yourself, which is just a really great guitar rock and roll song by a bunch of long-haired dudes who are out there kicking ass, man. Really like that one. I'm tying it with After Disaster from the New City and Color record. Much, much different vibe. Person in a much, much different stage of his career, Dallas Green. But his new record, the New City and Color record, is really, really great. And After Disaster is just a fun song to play around with on the drums. Some really interesting and subtle stuff happening. It's a dark song. It's a sad song. And it's done in the way that only Dallas Green can do these things. So it's a tie for 10th. Hate Yourself by Lost Hearts, After Disaster by City and Color. And by the way, if you've not listened to this stuff, I have the Spotify playlist. I don't know if you've checked it out or not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a top 10 playlist. So I'm going to put all these songs on a playlist. So if you haven't listened to them yet, you can. You can find them all in one little spot. And people like Katie and Josh, who are always out there listening for new rock and roll music, are going to find a lot of it on this list, okay? Number 9, the German guitar virtuoso Martin Miller and his song, Something New. I mean, it's months ago that we listened to this one. Just some really dazzling guitar work. Not just the guitar work, though. The drums are great on this. This is like a prog rock kind of song. Really great chorus. Really great energy. It freaking slams. And it's a prog song, man. It goes in a lot of different directions. But this cat can really play guitar. And it turns out he can really sing, too, which is not something he necessarily wanted to do. But then you listen to him sing, and it's like, dude, why were you not singing all along? You're freaking killer. So Something New by Martin Miller is number 9. The number 8 song I'm giving to Road Wolf, that is Supernatural. And this is such a banger. I mean, there were periods of time where it was higher on the list. Stuff gets shuffled around, and the list changes by the hour. This is what we're getting right now, and it could change tomorrow. Supernatural by Road Wolf, very 70s. Straight up. Guitar, bass, drums, great singer. Love the verses on this song. It's one of those ones where the verses are catchy, and it's just a big ass rock and roll guitar song. Road Wolf, the number 8 song, Supernatural. Number 7, another big, nasty rock and roll tune, Downriver by Deadly Vices. And I'm giving Downriver by Deadly Vices the Lip Curl of the Year award because the guitar riff in that chorus is just so lip curling. Just ultimately, Lost Hearts has this rock and roll swagger. This tune by Deadly Vices, just that chorus curls your freaking lip. It's just more of a grunge vibe, but man, that chorus just curls your lip I love the guitars on that chorus. It's not a difficult riff. It's not an intricate riff, but it's just got this push on it. And you just curl your freaking lip, man. You're air guitaring that. You really hit the chords on that chorus. That's number 7, Downriver by Deadly Vices. Number 6, a much, much different song. And that is Kisses by Slowdive. We did a whole episode about Slowdive, who it turns out has been around since the early 90s, and they were a big, big part of this shoegaze scene from back in the day. And so we used that as a way into shoegaze, and this modern version of Slowdive delivers another shoegazy song. A lot of guitar effects, a lot of kind of muted vocal. The shoegaze stuff is all about how the bands would stand on stage just looking at their feet because they were so busy working all of the pedals to make all these atmospheric, vibey sounds, right? So they dubbed this shoegaze music because the bands are way more preoccupied with making the sounds than putting on a show. But there's a total 80s feel on this. Chorusy kind of guitars and a lot of effects. It's really just a kind of a haunting song, and I dig the haunting songs, man. But like a mid-tempo haunter. Kisses by Slowdive. And that is your top, that's 10 through 6, all right. I'm going to do the top 5 a little bit later on. Before I get to that, I'm going to, for the last time this year, do the Patreon plug, okay? Yes, there is a Patreon page for this podcast. It is patreon.com/JohnHuffPodcast. And I want to thank you, all of you out there who have signed up to support me on Patreon. I have one tier of membership. It is $5 a month. And I frame it like tipping me $1.25 for every episode I do. If you are getting something from this, if you are being inspired, educated, motivated, if you are learning about new music, if you are simply appreciating having some positive talk in your freaking ears and you think to yourself, that's worth $1.25 to me, or less, I suppose, than the price of a cup of freaking coffee. If you feel that way and want to support the show, patreon.com/JohnHuffPodcast is the way to do that. And it's a way to do that without me having to fill this podcast with freaking ads. I hate the ads. You know, if we want to talk about something I despise the ads. And I'm so frustrated by podcasts that are just ruined by ads, that seem to just be vehicles for ads. Drives me nuts. And that's a reason why on Apple or on whatever podcast service you use to listen, they've got the fast forward 30 seconds button. That's to skip the ads, man, because we know how freaking annoying those are. Don't want to put ads on the podcast. I've set up Patreon as a way of recouping my expenses, etc., for the work that I put into this program, and I want to thank everybody who has supported me there. Thank you so, so much. John-Huff.com/shop, is where you can find cool t-shirts and mugs. Thank you to everybody who has purchased merch from me this year. I so appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who has shared episodes, who has told a friend. This is the best marketing. The best thing you can do for me is share the episodes or tell a friend. And I'll continue soliciting for ratings and reviews on your preferred podcast platform. I have difficulty competing with the Julia Louis-Dreyfuses of the world. Your rating and review on your preferred podcast platform helps me just a little bit work against the avalanche, the tsunami, the tidal wave of celebrity that dominates the podcast space. I love Julia Louis-Dreyfus. I cannot compete with her on name. So your ratings and reviews help me just a little bit, just a drop in the ocean against the kind of algorithm that dictates what you see and what you don't when you open up your podcast app. Really appreciate that. It warms my cockles too. It warms my cockles to know that something I'm saying or doing is resonating with you out there. Got a message recently from a listener who had listened to whatever episode it was, just saying how much that episode spoke to them at a time when it was really needed. And it just lifts me up to hear that. Because a lot of the time you are speaking into the void, man. It feels that way. Like I'm talking into a vacuum. And then once in a while somebody pops up and says, hey, that episode really helped me or showed me something or taught me something. And that's kind of what it's about, man. And so I appreciate anybody who takes the time to tell me that. And tell your friends. Share the episodes if you can, please. The merch, patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. That's all the plugging for this year, except to say thanks a lot. I'd really genuinely, thanks a lot for hanging in, all right, and for listening, and for sharing and supporting and encouraging. It really, really helps. And I encourage you to do that for everybody you listen to, whether that's a band or a podcast or a YouTuber. It costs nothing to put down a comment that says, that was really good, thank you, or I enjoy this, thank you, or to send a private message. It doesn't cost you anything. It only takes a second. And it's such a lift, such an encouragement to those people to hear that what they're doing is resonating out there in the world. Because a lot of times we don't hear that. And it's sort of, you have to just continue on, you know? Thank you to everybody for all of that. Okay. I got another question when I solicited, and it's relevant to what I just said about podcasting. It comes from Farmer John. Who, you ask yourself, is Farmer John? Farmer John is the host of another forthcoming podcast called Psychedelic Relics, all right? Now, Farmer John is a wealth of knowledge about the history of music, and so he has decided to produce this new podcast, which highlights records from primarily the 1960s that were part of the 60s pop, the 60s psychedelia movement, that were really, really fabulous records that, for whatever reason, didn't really get heard. You know, everybody heard the Beatles and all of their psychedelic music, and that was everywhere. But there's a whole list as long as your arm of other records that got released that were fabulous that just didn't get picked up. Now, the 60s were an interesting time in music because record labels were really coming into their own. And this notion of selling records, particularly to kids, they all wanted to find something that would sell. And so what they did is that they brought in a lot of different artists, a lot of different bands to make records of very wildly varying styles and substance, throwing spaghetti, hoping something that would stick. And so there's zillions of records that were produced in that time. Some of them did well, some of them didn't. A lot of them have been lost to history. Farmer John, on his Psychedelic Relics podcast, is bringing them back and talking about them, playing some of the music, interviewing some of the folks who are still around from those sessions and those bands. Going to be a really, really interesting show, hosted and curated by a cat who really knows his stuff and has a deep and abiding passion for music. So if you miss some of my episodes that I used to do that were more music focused, jump onto Psychedelic Relics. Get in on the ground floor. The first episode is not dropped yet. There's a trailer coming. The show's going to launch in the new year. It's going to be really, really good, and I encourage you to check it out and support it, okay? Farmer John says, what makes a podcast great? Important question for him as he embarks on a podcast. And I don't know if I have a really satisfying answer to that because the podcast, like music, like art, like writing, like anything, it's so subjective, right? So what makes something great for me might not make it great for somebody else. But I think the common denominator in a great podcast is the host. Whether that's a solo show like mine, whether that's an interview show, the host is the common denominator, right? The host is what's familiar to you. And so what I love in a podcast, what I think is a great podcast, is an engaging host, an articulate, intelligent host talking about something or with someone about subjects about which they are passionate. I like listening to lectures. I like listening to presentations. I like listening to smart people talk about stuff that they're really excited about. And so if I can run into a podcast, like say the Blind Boy podcast, where you have a really, really bright host talking really, really articulately about interesting stuff, that's going to make it great, but it doesn't necessarily translate all the time. And I can't really put my finger on what separates one from another. Now we have Bill Burr, also a solo podcast, which I go in kind of spurts with Bill Burr. I'll listen for a while and then not listen for a while. And he's probably the funniest human being on the planet. And he's a bright guy, and he's a really entertaining and a really funny guy. It's his freaking job, man, to be funny and entertaining. And yet it doesn't always hit with me. And Blind Boy also doesn't always hit with me, but he hits with me more consistently. And I just suppose it's a subjective thing. I can't say what makes a podcast great, but I can say that a host that doesn't interest you is going to kill your podcast. I know that will make it not great, at least for the individual listener. But it's such a freaking crapshoot, and so much of it comes down to personality. And as an interviewer, so many times when I read through reviews of other people's podcasts, they'll say, "Tell the host to shut up." So many hosts of these podcasts that are interview podcasts just talk over the guest all the freaking time. And they cut in and they interrupt and they one up and they got to tell their own story. It's like, so you can have shows that are really beautifully produced, professionally marketed, have big name guests on them. And the host can kill that show because the host doesn't realize it's not about him or her. And they won't shut up, And so I endeavor as an interviewer, to the extent that I can, to not say much of anything. Let your guest freaking talk, man. That's why, for the most part, people are tuning in. If I'm tuning in to an interview podcast, the reason I'm tuning in is to hear whoever the guest is. And this is what I ran into when my show was primarily an interview show. It's like your downloads might be really great for one episode, and you think, all right, we're getting somewhere. And then the next episode, there's almost none because people aren't tuning in for that guest or whatever. So the host, though, is always the common denominator. So I think what's going to make a podcast great is that host, whether that host is a skilled interviewer, whether that host is just compelling to listen to, or is funny, or is in whatever way appealing to whatever you find interesting. And no podcast is for everyone. So I know that's not a very satisfying answer, Farmer John. It's very difficult to know what makes one great. It's very much easier to sort out what makes one not so great. And it's really, really tough. And if you're in the podcast game, there is this temptation all the time to try to write to the market. That's a literary term. That is writing books that you hope will capture what's hot at the moment. Podcasting, it's easier to do that because it's way more immediate. You can write a novel and it's perfect for right now when everybody's reading The Hunger Games. But that novel's not going to come out for 2 years in the publishing process in that schedule. And by then, the heat's off. They're on to something else now. 50 Shades of Grey or something like that. Very, very tough in the literary world because it moves so slowly. Podcasting is immediate. You can try to capture the zeitgeist, but if you do that, are you doing it genuinely? And if you're not doing it genuinely, it's just not going to work. People aren't idiots. They understand when you're phoning it in. They understand when you're just trying to kind of play the popularity game. I run into this all the time. One of the reasons that my podcast has been so wildly inconsistent in terms of its content and its presentation is because part of me is always trying to work to whatever the best practices are, whatever the recommendations are. But the problem is, on a technical level, that can work really, really well. It's like, okay, you need your podcast to kind of sound like this, like fix your audio. that's practical and that's very useful. But then it's like, well, no, your podcast needs to within 30 seconds do this, and it has to touch on this, and you've got to talk about whatever this hot issue is, and you've got to have controversial guests, and you got to da-da-da-da-da, all about the ratings. And as soon as you start worrying all about the ratings, you start losing all of the art. Same for music, same for whatever. It's like you can write a pop song that ticks all the freaking boxes, and they've got AIs beginning to do that already. And that pop song may be a hit for a minute, but will it endure? No, it's disposable because there's nothing in it. It's not genuine, you know? And so you straddle this line all the time as a podcaster between doing something that has some potential for success, but also doing something that's really genuine. And I struggle with this all the freaking time. And over the next few weeks, as I take a break from this show, I'm going to be contemplating how I go forward from here, because I feel like one of the things that makes a podcast great is genuine buy-in and enthusiasm from the host or hosts. And if what you're getting is phoned in is the wrong word, but if it's done not from a place of genuine enthusiasm, but from a place of what you hope will sell, it just cheapens and weakens the product, you know? And so I need to take a look at my own show, and I intend to over the next little while, and figure out what's genuinely resonant for me in it. And if that means trending more towards spirituality, if that means trending more towards personal development and away from music or whatever, or vice versa, that's got to be the genuine thing. And, you know, you can lose people doing that. I've lost people before. When I switched from interviews to solo, I lost most of my audience. To be frank, I lost most of my audience that way. But it's what felt genuine to me, all right? It's what felt like the show wanted. And so, Farmer John, I say that to you. It's like you have to do what is genuine to you. And that won't necessarily make your podcast great, but not doing what's genuine to do will make it not great. That's the ultimate reality. The dream, the ideal is to have a topic about which you are genuinely interested and passionate, and to deliver that, and that topic has some potential for an audience out there. I think talking about 60s records does, especially amongst podcast listeners who tend to be, I think, older now. I mean, the YouTube generation, the YouTubers tend to be younger people, and that's where they go to. But a lot of those younger people aren't all that interested in records from the 1960s. A lot of them don't realize there were a 1960s, okay? Daddy, is it true that Paul McCartney was in a band before Wings? So, you got to do what's genuine to you and deliver that in the most professional way that you can. And also leveraging, I think, your own personality. You've got to be you. I am something of a trumped up me on this program. That's just the idiom that I've developed. Really, really hard to say what makes a podcast great, but all that stuff can certainly make one not great, you know? Thank you so much, Farmer John. Best of luck to you on your program. Listen for that, kids. Psychedelic Relics, coming soon to a podcast app near you. Before we wrap this up for the year, let's do the top 5 countdown, kids. The John Huff Podcast. Top 5 songs of the year. Number 5, Drowning by Elizabeth Winterbourne. Drowning by Elizabeth Winterbourne is the Taylor Swift song that Taylor Swift wishes she wrote. I love the Elizabeth Winterbourne story because we had her on the show, kids. We got to meet her this year. All right, one of the other songs on this list I went to listen to, and the recommendation from YouTube was this tune Evergreen by Elizabeth Winterbourne, who I did not know. She's an indie artist, lives in New York. And so I listened to Evergreen and I freaking loved it. And I talked about it on this show. And then I thought to myself, why don't we get Elizabeth Winterbourne on if we can and talk to her about it? And I reached out to her and she said yes. And then I started going through her catalog, and this song Drowning is on her record that came out this year. And I just freaking loved it. It's a 100% pop song. It is so catchy, but it's also really dark. It's got a Taylor Swift kind of chorus. I mean, Taylor, God love her, she's got a knack for a chorus, man. Well, so does Elizabeth Winterbourne. And I think this song should have been a massive hit. And if it maybe had a label and a marketing machine behind it, it would have been. And maybe it still can be. I don't know. But yeah, Elizabeth Winterborn, indie artist, is making this list with some of the freaking heavyweights that are on it. And I really, really love that song. And it was such a treat to actually get to meet her and have her on the show and hear her talk about her music. Follow Elizabeth Winterborn out there, kids. She is definitely an artist on the rise and someone to pay attention to, okay? Song number 4 is the song that led me to Elizabeth Winterborn, and that is Psychos by Jenny Lewis. Simple song, but it's just got that vibe that I love so freaking much. As I said on the episode where I talked about it, I said, as soon as I heard about 3 chords of this song, I was like, I just love this already. And I do. It's got a Bonnie Raitt kind of thing. It's got this Americana kind of thing going. Psychos by Jenny Lewis. What a great freaking song. Number 4 on my list this year. And Jenny Lewis is great. I mean, she's one of these people who has managed somehow to fly under the radar and still amass a huge following at the same time. She's freaking great, man. Jenny Lewis, go check her out. And her song Psychos is great. I'm not a psycho. I'm just trying to get laid. How you going to beat that for lyrics, man? How you going to beat that? The number 3 song of the year, and 3, 2, and 1 interchanged all year for me. Each of them came along kind of early in the year, so they've been kind of kicking around in my brain all year long. Number 3, at one point, I thought was going to be number 1. Things changed. Into the Horizon by Wintersea. Wintersea is a really, really heavy band. Generally with those kind of screaming vocals that I don't really dig on. I love metal screams, but they need to be melodic. This is more of that kind of black metal kind of scratching, growly tone. Not really my bag, but this song, Into the Horizon, from their new record release this year, is not that. It's a clean vocal, and it's a ballad, and I just really, really love it. There's something so evocative and dark and sad and melancholy and really effective about that song. And I've listened to it. Of all the songs on this list, it's right up there in terms of the songs that I've listened to most after having talked about it. I really love this song. I loved it from the beginning. I continue to love it now, and it could very easily have landed number 1. Into the Horizon by Wintersea. It did not land at number 1. Number 2, this one flipped, flopped all freaking year long. I'm going number 2, The Dark Tower by Burning Witches. This I loved again right from the very freaking beginning because it's a metal band playing 80s thrash sounds, 80s thrash riffs. It's so heavy and yet groovy at the same time. This is the thing about a band like, say, Anthrax. Heavy as hell, but still groovy too. Like you can dance to Anthrax music. It's just got this momentum to it. Big 80s sounding riffs, 80s sounding guitars. There's like a Slayer kind of vibe on it, an Anthrax kind of vibe on it. And I just loved the riffs and I loved the guitar tones. Right from the very beginning, I was into that song. And then Laura Goldemond started singing. And that elevated this song to levels I was not expecting, all right? Along with the band Future Islands, Laura Goldemond is my musical discovery of the year. I think she might be the best metal singer on the planet. That's saying a lot, man. And I thought to myself, can she do this live? Like, there's no way someone can do live what I'm hearing on this track. And then I go look up live performances of The Dark Tower by Burning Witches, and she's just crushing every freaking note. There is so much power in that voice. I'm amazed, perpetually and continually amazed by people who can do what Laura Goldemond does. And I reached out to her more than once this year to try to get her on the show. and was resolutely ignored. But when you're at the level of Burning Witches, when you're at the level of Laura Goldemond, you got a lot of demands on your time. My little show doesn't quite rate, I guess. The Dark Tower by Burning Witches, an amazing headbanging song, and then it's just lifted by what I think might be the best metal vocalist on planet Earth, and that is Laura Goldemond. And it could very easily have been number one. It was for a long time. But I just couldn't shake the earworm, the 80s throwback. So happy. Such a wonderful, uplifting, fun freaking song by The Defiance. Number one, the John Huff Podcast Song of the Year, 19 Summertime. By The Defiance. And I'm like, yeah, I just can't shake it, man. I'm smiling as I talk about it. This is Paul Lane. Former members of Danger Danger got together and created this band called The Defiance, and they are playing unabashed, unapologetic 80s hard rock throwback music. And this tune, 19 Summertime, just makes you freaking smile, man. And in a year when it's been hard to smile at times, 3 months of back spasms, 4 months of renovation, it's been at times difficult trying to go straight, trying to land a regular job, being knocked back in many ways by that process. Then you get a tune like 19 Summertime by The Defiance, and you just smile. I mean, that chorus is so good. And it takes me back to the 80s, and it invokes such fun memories of time gone by. And that's what the song is about. I remember when you were mine back in 19 Summertime. This is this cat lamenting his high school girlfriend that got away, Perpetual Summertime, the 1980s, man. And I'm giving my song of the year to The Defiance, 19 Summertime. So many of those tunes could have been number one. And there are tunes that did not make the top 10 that could have. I mean, I listened to a lot of really, really cool music this year. It's been the benefit, one of them, of this podcast, And I'm going to be honest right now, kids, I don't know if we're going to keep that focus going forward or not. I have some noodling to do. And I'm open to your suggestions on how we might proceed with this show, man. One of the things I'm very likely not going to be doing is hour-long episodes like this one. But it's the end of the year extravaganza. Had a lot to talk about. Hope that's okay. What I want to say to you is thank you ever so much. Those of you who have hung through, those of you who have let me mess about trying different stuff and histories and whatever it is. I realize that I've asked a lot of you in terms of your attention, and I appreciate so much that you have given it, that you have supported, that you have encouraged, that you have been so willing to help me as I figure out whatever it is on earth that I'm doing here. But I sense maybe some change of focus coming and format, maybe just a little bit. Just going to tighten things up, I think, in terms of length for my own benefit as well as yours. But we'll see, man. We will see what unfolds. Until then, please have yourself a merry little Christmas. Please do enjoy, if you get the opportunity, just withdrawing from the world a little bit. Engage and indulge to every extent that you can the silence, the peace and quiet that can be had during the Christmas season, all right? And on New Year's Day, just take a little walk through your neighborhood. Just feel that stillness. Feel that quiet, man, because that's what it's really all about. And that is so much what's missing from the world today, missing from our lives today, is just that simple silence. So get it while you can, kids, all right? Get it over this Christmas season, and also get the opposite of that. Hang out with people, have some drinks, have some freaking laughs. Do what warms your freaking cockles throughout this holiday season. That's what I intend to do. Going to be off for a little bit now while I recharge the old batteries. But we'll be back. We'll be back, and we'll carry on this freaking thing, man, whatever it is. Until then, remember that good things happen when you put yourself out there. And hey, kids, I'll check you in the new year. Yeah. I still dream about you back when you were mine. Back in 19 summertime. How can you not freaking smile?